How unscrupulous is the world of football? This week, it's felt like we've had a death in the family and we haven't even had a chance to mourn or go to a funeral, and boom, there's a new guy through the door. It's time to move on. For this week's show, I'm going to pull out a very interesting whiskey called Nikka. This has been obsessively crafted by the Japanese, and it's become more and more popular, even though it's very, very young. Most importantly, though, it's surprisingly good. And let's hope we can say the exact same thing for Aston Villa's new manager, Steven Gerrard. Welcome back to the Villa Parlour, and so soon. And I want to reiterate, I have absolutely no idea what happens behind the scenes. I'm making assumptions based on bits and pieces that I get, and I was hammered pretty good. The most I've been hammered since I started this show about my take on how things went down last week. But I want to reiterate, players decide games. Your coach, manager, and technical staff can prepare the squad as best as they possibly can with tactics and video analysis and all that work. And they can set their stall out on a Saturday with the right formation. But if a player has a mental lapse or makes a catastrophic personal error, there is absolutely nothing that the manager can do except say, "You're out next week," if he even has the squad depth to do so. The other thing I was thinking a lot about this past week was just how decisions are made within Aston Villa. And again, we don't know, but it sure seems to me like Christian Purslow has a lot of power in the club. And that could be a dangerous thing because the best run clubs in the world have two very distinct branches. There's the football or sporting side, and then there's the business and commercial side. And rarely do those cross over. And there should be a head of football and there should be a head of commercial and business, and they report straight to the owners or to a CEO. But you run into problems when the business people start influencing football decisions. And again, I don't know what's happening, but my preference would be to keep them separate. There is this bizarre manager messiah complex among many supporters who think that the entire fortunes of a football club are tied to one person at that club, and that is absolutely not how it works. But I'm moving on. We are where we are. It's time for me, and my role is to fully examine and research the assets and the liabilities of what Steven Gerrard brings to the table at Villa Park and understand how the current squad at Aston Villa will fit into the philosophies and systems that he employed at Ibrox, with some success, it needs to be said. Right, so here we go then with the big issues or questions surrounding the appointment of Steven Gerrard as Aston Villa's new head coach. An honorable mention goes to so many Rangers fans that I know. It is unbelievable how many Gers fans we have living in and around the Vancouver area. Oh, and they are such a long day going on and on about the world-famous Glasgow Rangers. My phone has not stopped for the last couple of days with them texting me, and they are devastated. They are totally gutted, which is kind of a good sign for us. Do you know, Steven Gerrard said it himself that he was born ready to deal with the pressures of football. He actually identified that at a very young age. So he will not be overawed by the Aston Villa job, the jump to the Premier League, the change in the standard that's going to be very obvious, and of course, the incredible media scrutiny that he's going to be under. This guy is not a shrinking violet. He is wired for this. And when you consider the global reach and profile of Glasgow Rangers Football Club, and that was his first ever job, you got to say he's done all right. And that should give us all a sense of comfort and confidence in this hire. Number 3. What's he like? Simple enough question. This is the best quote that I've heard from Steven Gerrard. Football is not about just turning up and playing. Football is about dealing with everything that comes with it. Here's a guy who, to this day, is still somewhat haunted by the slip versus Chelsea. And the measure of a man is not how you deal with bringing your team from 3 goals down to win a Champions League. It is how you deal with a cruel twist of fate that costs your team a title. And the other thing that you hear an awful lot about Steven Gerrard is that he simply has way higher standards than the majority of people in football simply because of his accomplishments and because of the pressure and the expectation of his role within a huge football club. Gerrard is clearly ambitious, otherwise he's not going for this job, and that's a good thing, but let's just keep in the back of our mind that Aston Villa is not Steven Gerrard's final destination. And while we're at it, let's spare a thought for those poor Rangers fans because this happened so quickly. It was incredible. It was almost as if, maybe Christian Purslow sent a cheeky FaceTime to Stevie G asking, "You fancy it?" Even while Dean Smith was still employed. You have to wonder, given how fast this has all happened and with all these managers moving around, you wonder maybe did he want to pounce before somebody else came in for him? But the point must be reiterated. Steven Gerrard, in a best case scenario, does really well at Aston Villa. Are we one day going to feel like those Rangers fans are feeling today when somebody like, say Liverpool come calling for him? I've actually crossed paths a couple times with Steven Gerrard while he spent his 1 year in MLS in LA, and it was really obvious to me what a consummate professional this guy was, like laser focused. And I say this in a complimentary way, but almost savant-like obsessive. He is that detail-oriented and an insatiable appetite for learning. And that's great for everybody else. Sometimes you worry a guy like that burns out. But here's a person who was adamant in bringing people to round out his staff that filled the knowledge gaps that he had with tactics and game preparation, which I'll get to in just a moment. But that growth mindset is a continuum of Dean Smith and what the owners wanted Aston Villa. So very collaborative leadership approach, very open with the players. And that actually encourages me because that is a little bit like how Dean Smith operated. Number 2, how will Steven Gerrard set up Aston Villa tactically? The tactics and systems question. And what I'm encouraged by is that since he arrived in 2018, there has been an evolution to his tactical play and some tweaks that he's made along with his staff, starting with the 4-3-3 when he arrived in 2018, very basic and familiar with Aston Villa fans and players, which is good for continuity's sake, as is the 4-2-3-1, which he evolved to after that, because Villa have played that in recent times. But it's the next evolution of 4-3-3 I found very fascinating, and I haven't got it quite set up right here on the board because Morelos, the striker on the ball, actually at times was flat between the two players beside him who functioned as two number 10s. And I found this very interesting. So a flat and narrow front three that at times gegenpress, like Jurgen Klopp's teams. They move side to side together, they move forward together, and they hunt together, and they try to make themselves available to play between the lines of the opposition. So a very subtle thing, and he managed to convert a lot of former midfielders and wingers into those positions very comfortably, along with his staff, of course. Now, the narrow front three means a lot of emphasis is placed on the fullbacks providing support. And we know that both Matt Targett and Matt Cash have it in them at times to play football up front and combine as attacking wide players, and they're going to have to. And the end product is going to have to be better, and there's going to have to be a lot of work. But what encourages me is that it's very clear how he's playing. He's had success with this formation. He also played 4-4-2 in Europa League, and I think it's not a major departure from what Aston Villa has been doing, which means there's a little bit of continuity to the lineups. Now, the one thing about elite footballers who become managers, and I saw this firsthand with Thierry Henry, is that sometimes when you're a genius and you were born with the instinct plus the athletic ability and just the God-given talent, it is difficult to explain to others how things work and how things should be done. I saw this all the time with Henry, and he used to get really frustrated because everybody else was not as good as him. And when things didn't work out on the field and he couldn't explain to them why, it was really difficult for him. Now, does Steven Gerrard fall under the genius category? In his position, he probably does. But there's also the benefit of being a name and a legend. And if you're a player that's deciding, well, do I go to that club or that club? Sometimes that little bit of appeal may pull a player in. But there is a reason why so many of the best managers in the world were very average or below average footballers, and they had to compensate for their lack of talent by learning everything there was to learn about the game. And the number one big issue or question regarding the Steven Gerrard hire is, how will the Villa squad react to his appointment and the new ideas I was just sharing with you, going back to that 4-3-3 for a moment, because I think that front, flat, narrow 3 could actually work for a lot of players. Ollie Watkins, obviously, is a pressing forward straight down the middle of the park, but he could play in either of those two number 10 roles, couldn't he? If they're narrow and pressing and hunting together. And forgive me for playing FIFA fantasy for just a moment here, but is John McGinn not perfectly suited for the left side of this front 3? Because think about it, he can play on the left side. He could get forward more, shoot more, and attack more, as well as help press, without having the responsibility of being caught in possession or turning over balls in the middle of the park. It might give him more freedom playing more advanced, and some fans have been calling for that for quite some time. Well, a fresh new set of eyes might see that in the manager. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a couple of options. You could put Leon Bailey there. I know it's not a traditional winger's role, but why couldn't he learn to play there? And don't you think a player with his pace could be a good pressing forward? Emiliano Buendia is comfortable on the right-hand side, and then you could always move Ollie Watkins to the left of those 3, and Danny Ings could come and play at that top spot. So I look at this lineup here and the way he wants to play, and I see options and potential, and there's a bunch of names I haven't mentioned. Jacob Ramsey, in my opinion, could play in one of those 10 spots because he's so athletic and so relentless, but I also think he could be one of the 3 midfielders because he's got that much of an engine on him, and he's really good at playing between the lines of the opposition and having the poise to play passes between players. Then there's Carney Chukwuemeka in the future. Well, he could play a 10 quite easily, couldn't he? The questions I would have is, what about Bertrand Traore or Trezeguet or El Ghazi? Traditionally players who like to be wide. Can they be converted into any of those 3 positions? That's going to be something to watch down the road. And although it seemed like the 4-3-3 with those 2 number 10s was Gerrard's preferred formation with Rangers and one the players were very comfortable with, it was nice to see that in the Europa League games against Brøndby, they did go 4-4-2, which shows that they were tactically flexible and that the players were willing to take things on board and learn their roles in a short period of time. And that came down to the technical staff, which included Gary McAllister and Jermaine Defoe, but the real brains behind the operation is a guy named Michael Beale. And Gerrard spotted him in his work and immediately poached him. He's been together with Gerrard ever since and is the guy who's responsible for all the training sessions and preparing tactically for the opponents. And I think he is a huge reason why Steven Gerrard took the job, knowing he could bring Beale with him. Now, I've seen suggestions that Gerrard will be backed for business in the January transfer window, which we'll wait and see who he trusts and how quickly he identifies the holes and weaknesses in the squad, which for me is central midfield, which is kind of his thing. And he will not put up with sloppiness as a number 6 or a couple of 8s, and nor will he accept mistakes from center backs. So hopefully Tyrone Mings will get sort of a little bit of a rejuvenation under Steven Gerrard. But the biggest thing for me, when you look at Aston Villa holistically and what they've done on the youth side, is to ensure that pathways aren't being blocked into the first team. And this is where I bring up Michael Beale again. And this is where I get excited, because Michael Beale's remit throughout his whole career was integrating youth, whether it was getting 18s into the 23s or 23s into the first team. He had a very good track record pretty much everywhere he went of turning young players into professionals. And that is a big relief for me, because the amount of money Aston Villa has spent and the time they've invested into youth, they can't throw that away now. We are that close to our own class of 92. Listen, I've made myself clear. I don't like how Dean Smith was disposed of, and I really don't like how football treats people. But I'm behind Steven Gerrard. We have no other choice, and it's time to move on. And so I'm going to back the new guy. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next 2 months, because there is a packed fixture list looming right through until the new year and the transfer window. And one way or another, the new manager will have a chance to build some momentum. The question is, in which way will that momentum swing? We'll find out soon enough. But until the Brighton game, stay well and up the mighty Villa.